Hi there, it's Miss Miller and welcome to our classroom channel. Today I want to talk to you about allusions in literature, but before we do that I want to share something that I overheard this morning on the way to work. AM 640 Talk Radio mentioned that the rapper Eminem just won a lawsuit in the amount of $600,000 because a New Zealand group had violated copyright infringement laws. And so I thought about students as well, and I thought, oh my goodness, all the New Zealand group did was borrow some lines or work from Eminem, and now they've got to pay up all this money. And so students think, okay, I can look at someone's paper on a test, and maybe I'm just copying down number 4. I'm only going to get what they have, or maybe even a homework assignment. And we characterize that as plagiarism. But in literature, what happens when an author borrows from another author? What do we call that? That's what we're going to talk about today. And so specifically, we're going to look at allusions in literature. And I like to call it the literary plagiarism. So, did you see how fast that was? Allusion is defined as a quick reference in a text to a person, an event, a place, or a thing that is either real or imagined. And so I have this illustration here because when you get a shot, it's really fast and quick. And so sometimes allusions in literature are very subtle. You might not see it right away unless you do a really close reading and you're really well read. So the assumption with allusion is that the reader or the audience and the writer or the author are on the same page, right? They share a set of common knowledge. They know similar things. And typically the writer, depending on when the text was set, what time frame it was, let's say for example in this calendar it shows 1930, they're assuming that their reader is also during the 1930s. They're present during that time period too, so that explains the language that they use. And so they're not necessarily always thinking about the audience that are among them today or among us today. Okay, so also the writer also assumes that most of us, when they're doing allusions, have a standard American high school education. So when they are including these allusions in their work, they assume that we know these things already. So forms of allusion can show up in different ways in a novel or even whatever literary text that you're reading. It can show up in the form of a quotation, right? So you might see something in a text and say, gosh, this line looks familiar. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I've seen it before somewhere else, not in this book. Chances are that is an example of an allusion. Sometimes you might be reading a text and you see the mention of a name of someone in the text, and perhaps that person is not part of the characters in the story. Chances are that is an allusion. You may also see phrases borrowed from another writer, so it might be a phrase more than a name or quotation that might suggest that there is an allusion in the text. So here's an illustration that I have for you. You see someone at the very top is saying, hey Shakespeare, can I borrow a line from one of your sonnets to put in my novel? And then Shakespeare, of course this isn't Shakespeare, but he responds by thou art idea well, as he who needs me knowest thou best, right? And so they borrow from each other, whether it's, you know, regardless of the time period. So there's two types of varieties when it comes to allusions. One is intra-literary, which just means that the reference is to materials inside of books. Extra-literary is reference to material outside of books. So authors or writers also use an allusion toolbox, I like to call it. And it consists of 4 main resources. One is Greek mythology. And basically it just means that if the writer is trying to communicate an idea to you, they might feel the best way to do that is by referencing another story, maybe a mythology. Let's say they're writing a book and they might reference something in mythology. And some popular ones are like the Trojan horse or the Achilles heel. They might reference either a name, right, a phrase, or even like a quotation. Another one is number 2 is historical reference for the allusion toolbox. So maybe you're pulling like a former president's line, a speech, a famous line from the speech that the writer is assuming that we all will recognize and say, hey, you know what, that sounds familiar. That sounds like the line from this person's speech in history. A third one, a very popular one, is biblical reference. So a biblical allusion. So basically an author might try to communicate an idea, a virtue, or some sort of concept by referring to different parts of the Bible, different people in the Bible, and assuming that you are already familiar with it and you've already read the Bible. And you would be able to pick up on that reference rather quickly and understand what's happening in the text without the author having to explain everything in detail. So it's a very economical way to communicate ideas by having allusions in the text. Or it could be as simple as a fairy tale, that maybe you recognize the same concept or idea from a childhood story that you read when you were 5 or 6. It's your toolbox, obviously, for allusions is not limited to these 4. It could be film, it could be art, it could be several different things, but the popular ones, the ones that most authors use, is mythology and biblical references, number 1 and number 3. So if you become very, very well versed in that, then you'll be able to detect allusions very easily in most texts. And so there's the Bible and the Trojan horse, and then the childhood fairy tale as well. So there is something called specialized allusions. So there are on occasions where an author might say, hey, I'm not going to use any of the 4. I'm not going to use historical references. I'm not going to use biblical allusions. I'm not going to use fairy tales. I'm not going to use any mythology. I'm going to use something that I've read in my private library, my own resources. And so it's not going to fit any of those. So my readers might not have ever read these things. And so they definitely aren't going to connect the allusions in the text unless they do some outside research, and that's called specialized allusions. Now, the purpose of allusions is allusions serve to illustrate or expand on a subject. Allusion enlarges the perspective. It definitely complicates the text, right? Because you have to do some more work to figure out what's happening, or you at least need to have more information or background knowledge. Allusions can also predict overall meaning that a reader may come across in a literary work. So it gives you some idea of some of the major concepts that are expressed in a piece of work. In some cases, allusions are used to undermine or undercut it ironically by the difference between the subject in a work and the allusion. And the difference in those is considered or called an ironic allusion. I think we need to practice that idea in class for it to really resonate with you. Now, I call this I spy an allusion. What do you do when you see something that you don't understand? Well, first of all, you've got to read closely to be able to pick up on this. And I think it's kind of hard for you to see because I'm in the way. So I'm going to, when I get down to the bottom, I'm going to take myself out of the equation here. But first thing you want to do is identify unknown words, lines, or phrases in the text. If it's not really making sense to you, like I don't know who this person is in this text, I don't know what this line means, it may possibly be an allusion. Research the unknown details, and here's where I'm going to admit myself. Apply the research to the original work so that it makes sense. Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to copy that down. And then this is the last idea, but titles are oftentimes allusions too. So we have this title of it's a novel, one of the most popular ones coming out of Africa, Things Fall Apart. And if you notice, this is the title of it. And then if we take a look at, and this is a recent novel, if we take a look at William Butler Yeats' poem, the first stanza, and this is back in 1865, you'll see that the title, and not even the title, the third line also reflects Things Fall Apart. So the title is an allusion to the first 3 words in the third line of the stanza in The Second Coming. Now, I want to talk to you about a double allusion because the title of William Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, is an allusion to the Bible, the Revelation or the Bible or the Second Coming. So that's a double allusion. That's it that we're going to cover for allusions, and we're going to discuss the rest in class. We'll discuss what it looks like and it looks like in our piece of work that we're studying. Thank you.